The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Private Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was director of a firm called Groening's, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde, and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time climbing over garden fences, spying on the neighbours. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they were also had a secret. They had their greatest fear was somebody would discover it. Didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter and Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister had a good-for-nothing husband, was as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbours would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Miss and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky which I'd suggest that strange and mysterious thing would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked up his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled the screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little Tyke cruttled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize that he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Private Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could have he been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat instead. Back as Mr. Dursley drove it around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Private Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards the town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't be people who dressed in funny clothes. The get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this was some sort of stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a handful of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley, enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. In fact, the man had to be older than he was and wearing an emerald green cloak that never him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that he was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, they would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later Mr. Dursley arrived in the Groening's car park, and his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight. The people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed at both, and as hour after hour sped overhead, most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks when he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters, that's right, what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something to them, but the top better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking no, he wasn't being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mr. Darcy. She always got so upset at the mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister like that, but all the same, these people in the cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on the drills this afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone outside the door. Sorry, he grunted as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Darcy realized that the man was wearing a violent cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made a passerby step, "Don't be sorry, my dear, for nothing could upset me more today. Rejoice, for you know whom has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating. This is a happy, happy day." And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood just rooted in the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things which he had never hoped before because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was a tabby cat he'd spotted in the morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around the eyes. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior, Mr. Dursley wondered? Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was so determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mr. Dursley had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter, and how Dudley had learnt a new word, shan't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normal. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night, they are hardly ever seen in daylight. These have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The new reader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious, and now over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers fast tonight, Jim? Well, Ted's the weatherman. I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. The years are far parts of Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been floating in. And tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they'd had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire nights early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can't promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair, shooting stars all over Britain. Owls fly by daylight. Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place, and a whisper about the Potters. Mr. Darcy came into the living room, carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat, nervously. Petunia, dear. You haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, you're normally present, and she didn't have a sister. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owl, shooting stars, and there was a lot of funny-looking people in town today. So is that, Mrs. Dursley? Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her lot. Mrs. Dursley slipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whatever he dared tell her. He had heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, "Their son. He'd be about 30's age now, wouldn't he?" "I suppose so," said Mr. Dursley stiffly. "What's his name again?" "Howard, isn't it?" "Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me." "Oh, yes," said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. "Yes, I quite agree." He didn't say another word on the subject as they were upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down to the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Private Drive as though it had been waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all these have anything to do with the Potters? If it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last confronting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well that he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. And how very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat in the wall was showing no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Private Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door was on the next street. No one to else looped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight if the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner. The cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and suddenly that you'd have thought he'd popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and his eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen in Private Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old. Judging by the silver of his hair and his beard, which he had long enough to tuck into his belt, he was wearing a long robe, a purple cloak which swept the ground, and high-heeled, buckled boots. His blue eyes were bright and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. The man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in the street where everything from his name to his boots were unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak looking for something, but he didn't seem to realize he was being watched, because he looked up and suddenly at a cat which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." He had found what he was looking for. In his inside pocket, what seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer until the only lights left in the whole street were two tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of a cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even a beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley would have been able to see anything that was happening down the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back into his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but it was a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned and smiled at the tabby, but it had gone, and said he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of markings the cat had on its eyes. She too was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat so stiffly." "You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day," said Professor McGonagall. "All day? When you could have been celebrating, I must have passed the dough feasts and parties on my way here." Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh yes, everybody's celebrating, all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no, even the muggles have noticed something's going on. It wasn't their news." She jerked her head back to the Dursley's dark living room window. "I heard it. Flocks of owls, shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something." "Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet that was Daedalus Diggle. He hadn't much sense." "You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. "I know that," said Professor McGonagall irritably, "but that's no reason to lose our heads. People are beginning downright careless out on the street in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle clothes, swapping rumours." Pardon me. She drew a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't. So she went on. "A fine thing it would be if, only on the very day you know who seemed to have disappeared at last, the muggles found out about us all." "I suppose Trudy has gone, Dumbledore." "It certainly seems so," said Dumbledore. "We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a sherbet lemon?" "A what?" "A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of muggle sweet I'm very fond of." "No, thank you," said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think this was the moment for sherbet lemons. "As I say, even if you know who has gone." "My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can tell him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort." Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unstickling 2 sherbet lemons, seemed not to notice. "It all gets so confusing if you keep saying you-know-who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name." "I know you haven't," said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exaggerated, half admiring, "but you're different. Everybody knows you're the only one who you-know-who, or, all right, Voldemort was frightened of." "You flatter me," said Dumbledore calmly. "Voldemort had powers I will never have, only because you're too well noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me to select my new earmuffs." Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, "The owls are nothing to be rumours. What there are flying around you-know-who, everyone's saying." "What about why he's disappeared, about what finally stopped him?" It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss, the real reason she had been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day, for neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another shepherd lamb and did not answer. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. He wanted to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter are now. They're dead. Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James, I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, all of us. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, said Hermione. Professor McGonagall was trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power somehow broke, and that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true, vented Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill the little boy. It's just astounding, as if all things to stop him. But how in the name of heavens did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We must never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath his spectacles. Dumbledore gave a sniff as she took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very old watch. It had 12 handles but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way? Yes, Professor McGonagall. I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here all over this places. I've come to bring Harry to his fountain, Uncle. The only one family he has left now. You don't mean you can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching him all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got his son. I saw our son kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry, come and live here. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be very able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter, repeated Professor McGonagall, Philly sitting back down the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today he was known as Harry Potter. Day in future, there will be books written about Harry. Even children in our world will know who his name is. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very seriously over the top of his half-moon glasses. It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Famous before he couldn't walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'd be growing up away from all that until his right is taken? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed it and said, yes, you're right, of course. But how is this boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly as though she thought he might be hiding Harry and Nathan. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it wise to trust Hagrid for something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid of my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying he hasn't been in the right place, said Professor McGonagall graciously, but you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to... What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken up the silence around them. It grew sadly louder as they looked down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled to a roar as they were both looking up at the sky, and the huge motorbike fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. The motorbike was huge. It was nothing to do with the man sitting inside it. He was almost twice as tall as the normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild, long tangles of bushy hair and beard, and most of his face he had hands the size of a dustbin lids, and his feet in the leather boots were like baby dolphins. In his vast muscular arms he was holding a bundle of blankets. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved at last. And where did you get that motorbike? Borrowed it, Professor. Dumbledore, sir, said the giant, clicking carefully up the motorbike. As he spoke, young Sirius Black lent it to me. I got him, sir. No problems there were? No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out all right before the muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we would fly over Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside his visible also the baby boy, fast asleep in a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead. They could see a curious-shaped cut like a bolt of lightning. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, Dumbledore. You'll have that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I've one myself above my left knee, which is a perfect map for London Underground. Well, give him here, Hagrid. We'll better get this over with. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards Dursley's house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy beard over Harry and gave him the most having a very scratchy, whispery kiss, and suddenly Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Shh, hissed Professor McGonagall. You woke the muggles. Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. But I can't stand Lily and James dead, and poor little Harry off the muggles. Yes, it's all very sad, but get a grip on yourself, Hagrid. All will be found. Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Harry gingerly on the arm, as Dumbledore stepped over the long garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, looked inside Harry's blanket, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Harry's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkle lights that was usually shown from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gotten that. Well, said Dumbledore, finally, that's that. We've no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations. Yes, said Harry in a muffled voice. I'd best get this back away. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir? Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Howard swung himself on the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air now. I shall see you soon, expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore. Nodding to her, Professor McGonagall blew her mind in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out the silver put out and fitted it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps. Instead, the private drive glowed suddenly orange, and he couldn't make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of the bench. Good luck, Harry, he muttered. He turned to his hail, and the Professor shook the cloak. He was gone. A breeze ruffled over the neat hedges of private drive, which lay silent under the blanky sky. The very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen, Harry Potter rolled over his blankets without waking up. Once more, hand closed on the letter beside him. He slept on it, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was in feelings, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours by the time Mrs. Dudley screamed when she opened the front door to put up the milk bottles. Nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Nellie. He couldn't know that at this very moment people meetings all over the country were holding up the glasses and singing hushed voice.